Cash is king. Get out of debt, stay out of debt. Build what you have to so you can build what you want to. These are the first 3 of 10 principles that James Benham has articulated in his new book, Be Your Own VC, 10 Bootstrapping Principles to Generate Cash and Keep Control. And it is my pleasure to welcome James to Construction Genius. James is a bootstrap serial entrepreneur, corporate innovator, and investor focused on technology that transforms the world's oldest industries. And he is the co-founder and CEO of JB Knowledge, which is a multinational technology and consulting company that develops industry-leading software for the largest insurance companies across the globe. Before he went into the insurance industry with his software, he was well known in the construction space for SmartBid, which became the leading construction bidding software for GCs worldwide. That was something that he sold a few years ago. So some of you in the construction space who are listening may be very familiar with James. The thing I like about James is that he's a very clear thinker and he's very straightforward. And it's really great because I asked him a question that many guests would perhaps attempt to answer, but he had no real opinion or strong view on it. So he refused to answer the question. Not really refused, but just didn't answer it. And I really like that. I like that in my interviewees, people who will talk about what they know and not talk about what they're perhaps not so comfortable getting into. So enjoy my interview with James. Feel free to share it with other people. Check out his book on Amazon. Links in the show notes to all the stuff that he does. Thank you, as always, for listening to Construction Genius, and enjoy our conversation. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. James, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure, and I'm having you on because you've recently published a new book. It's called Be Your Own VC, 10 Bootstrapping Principles to Generate Cash and Keep Control. I like that title. Love the idea of generating cash and keeping control. So I'd just like to kick off right from the gate and ask you, what do you mean by bootstrapping?
Yeah, it's something that's really not studied enough in college. I got 2 business degrees and we never talked about bootstrapping a business and what it really means. To me, bootstrapping is building what you have to build so you can build what you want to build and doing it with your own resources. Now, whether those resources are you and your co-founder pooling the money that you have, in our case, that was the case. And at the end of the day, I think it took us about $68,000 total, roughly, to get this enterprise off the ground 21 years ago. We pulled some money, only consumed our own cash, generated a profit doing service activities we could deliver immediately. And we used that profit to build the rest of our business.
How did you know what were the activities that would generate cash for you immediately? How did you figure that out?
Well, a lot of it is just going around asking people if they'll give you work and then finding out if they say yes. And that was the case for me. I could write code and I knew I could write code reasonably well. And that was a skill that was in demand in 2001. And I was in my dorm room at Texas A&M and went and met some former cadets that were in the Corps. I was in the Corps of Cadets, the ROTC at A&M, and Aggies are really, really loyal to each other. And inside the Aggie community, ex-cadets are extremely loyal to each other. And so I went around and met with some other ex-cadets and they owned businesses, and I asked them if they would give me some work and they said yes. So that was how I knew. And once we got engaged on the project, started building software and delivering it, they kept having me build more. And we used all the profit from those projects to build the products that eventually landed me in construction in 2006.
So tell me a little bit, why do you think people struggle so much with this whole concept of not going into debt when they start a business?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a problem with selective use of debt, but there's really expensive debt, which is when you go raise money from investors because it's money that you owe a lot more of later. And then there's cheaper debt, like you're dealing with the SBA loans, which are non-recourse loans that people go into, which is probably some of the better debt that you can actually get. And of course, buying property or equipment, often people use debt. But debt is a very dangerous tool. And there's 2 things that are taught in business school. They were when I went through my undergrad and master's degree in business. And that was that leverage is your friend. They renamed debt leverage, which makes it sound more friendly. That people go in with what you do. You get a pitch deck for your idea. Then you go pitch your deck to a bunch of investors. You raise a bunch of money. And then sometimes you raise debt as well. And then you go build your stuff. The problem is that debt really limits you. And so does raising money, because they both put you on an artificial timeline. They put you on either the bank's timeline or they put you on the investor's timeline. In both of those cases, you lose an incredible amount of control over the timing that you want to build your business in. And so bootstrapping, as I say, is the long, slow, painful way to build a business or to build anything. Because I actually spend a good bit of time. There's a whole chapter in this book dedicated to corporate innovators. And two of them that I mentioned are in the construction space, talking about how they use bootstrapping principles to really innovate and drive innovation at a larger company. And so the principles really, really help, regardless of whether you're starting a business or you're building innovation efforts inside of a large company.
Let's explore that a little bit. I think it's an interesting thing because I know that my audience are contractors, and I would say 98% of them are established businesses. Maybe a few are thinking about starting their own gig. But in those established businesses that you referred to, can you give us a couple of examples of using bootstrapping principles?
Yeah, I mean, if you go through, and I laid out 10 bootstrapping principles in the back. I try to make it easy on people who want the bullet point list and their bottom line up front people. And so when you look at what some of the examples that I talked about, where you're talking about, the number one rule is to survive. You build what you have to so you can build what you want to. Some examples I talked about in the book and some examples that I didn't get to put in the book just because at some point you get capped on the number of words that you can publish. That's like rule number 3, building what you have to so you can build what you want to. There's a lot of corporate innovation groups that will start with low-hanging fruit rather than tackle the really big project they want to tackle straight out of the gate, because that big project may take millions of dollars to tackle. And so what they'll do is they'll pick and choose low-hanging fruit. Like, hey, we're going to go paperless on the job site, like actually paperless. Hey, we're going to automate RFIs and punch lists and plan. We're going to take early steps over to BIM. Like, we're going to outsource the BIM work instead of just doing this on 2D plans. And then eventually we'll build our own practice in BIM. What they do is they use the money that they generate off of those activities, right? Because if you're doing it right, the low-hanging fruit generates additional profit that ideally you can use to invest in some of the larger scale initiatives. Well, that's bootstrapping. The very nature of bootstrapping. And I've executed bootstrapping principles at large public entities because I was a city councilman for 2 terms. And right now I'm a regent at a 9,000 student public university. And in both cases, I've built programs where the program itself generated a profit. And then we use the money the program generated to fund other initiatives. So that's really where I've seen building what you have to so you can build what you want to. It's also the art of targeting low-hanging fruit that whenever you fix it, and let's say, like, of course, I built bidding software for construction. Some of my clients would save $100,000 a year implementing bidding software, so they didn't have to print and mail plans, or they didn't have to deal with faxing. This is back in 06, 07, 08. Then they can use that money to plow into maybe their ERP initiative or a bigger estimating initiative or a Revit implementation initiative. So that's really where I've seen a lot of people use that principle. I'd say another one that really, really is important, and this is the chapter it's in, it's chapter number 8 of making innovation a habit and a process. In other words, actually not just innovating by seat of my pants. Most construction companies run on the seat of the pants of the owner. They don't actually have a process for running the business. Even if they have a project management process and a standard set of Excel documents or a project management software, that may be a process for running that project, but they don't have a defined playbook for running the business. And that's a really big weak point. And then when they start innovation or technology committees in their construction company, they end up in a lot of trouble because the meetings suck. The teams are largely rudderless. They don't have a specific method of get together and talk about exciting ideas. And unfortunately, after about 3 months of that, they get tired of it and they move on.
So let me ask you this. In terms of this innovation aspect in bootstrapping, what do you find is the biggest point of resistance in an established company when they are trying to do this bootstrapping, taking this bootstrapping perspective? Where does the resistance come from?
Well, it's longer, slower, and more painful, right? Because they want big wins now. And you find the same thing in startup companies. They want the big win now. They view them that they have like a very limited time window to take advantage of an opportunity in the market. And sometimes that's true. I mean, sometimes that's legitimately true. Like if you don't raise a bunch of money and spend a bunch of money and go all in on an idea now, you're going to miss your window. The reality is most times that's not true. Most of the time, you've got 2 or 3 years instead of 6 or 12 months. And so that's why a lot of people forego bootstrapping principles because they don't want to go through the long, slow, painful way of innovating. They want to go to the corporate innovation committee or the corporate investment committee and raise $3 million. And then they want to burn that $3 million. And I just went through this with a company that I know. That's all I'm going to say. A company that I know. I don't want to embarrass them, but they went to their corporate investment committee, raised a few $1 million. They burned through it in the first 18 months on a big innovative project. And ran out of capital because they went after the big idea first. And it turns out the big idea wasn't exactly right and they had to pivot. But after they had pivoted, they'd already raised and spent all the money that their corporate investment committee was going to generate. And if they had really broken it down into a smaller project, made their mistakes smaller, and worked on lower hanging fruit that could generate a profit for the business, they might have had a chance to go after the moonshot. But they never even proved themselves on that. They went for the moonshot straight out of the gate and really blew all the cash. And you see startups do that all the time as well.
So this longer, slower, harder, it just popped into my head that sometimes business is like a wilderness, right? And it's not very exciting. So as a leader, what should I be doing to keep my people's motivation high as we're going through those long, slow, hard days on the road to building something that's profitable and sustainable?
Yeah, I say rule number 6, get out and sell. The chief evangelist, the chief executive, now whether you're the CEO of a company or you're the president of a startup or you're the chief innovation officer at a construction company, at the end of the day, you've got to be the chief evangelist. And you've got to get out of your office and go sell. I mean, the best way to get people excited about something is to sell them on it. And you see that all too often where they'll mandate directives and they'll publish memos and they'll send out a notice that something's going to happen or they're going to do a new experiment. Let's just stay in the construction world for a second. Let's say that they're going to run a paperless job site trial, right? Which can be pretty traumatic for some people because you're talking about taking away paper plans and specs and you're putting in devices on the job site that have large screens they can use. I mean, it's going really paperless is actually still a big challenge. And so instead of spending the time and go out and sell people on it and have one-on-one time and pitch them on why this is a good idea, they notify them of what's going to happen. And that's pretty challenging. So I'd say you definitely have got to get out and sell. You got to be the chief evangelist.
I understand the idea of selling to, let's say, going out and selling to a new client or something like that.
No, this is to employees.
No, right. So let's talk about that a little bit. What are some of the steps that effective CEOs take when they're selling their employees on this journey that we're going?
Well, as Pat Lencioni would say, create organizational clarity and over-communicate organizational clarity. General rule of thumb is say it 7 times. I mean, selling your own people often is the toughest sale because they're used to hearing you talk and they're used to tuning you out. And so you definitely have to really repeat yourself over and over to the point of almost nausea. You have to repeat yourself and say, look, this is why we're doing this. This is what we're doing. This is where we're going. Here's the vision document. Here's the 1, 3, and 10-year plan, picture, and target. Here's what we're going to market with, and here's why. And then you have to repeat yourself. Like 4 months down the road, people start to become anchorless and they forget why they're doing what they're doing and what the big vision is and where they're going. Then it helps to repeat it again. And that's really the big challenge internally is people think that they shouldn't repeat themselves because they already said it once. I'm the exact opposite. I think you have to repeat yourself minimum 7 to 10 times. Every month, every quarter, every annual meeting you have, remind them, here's our values, here's our vision, here's our 1-year plan, 3-year picture, 10-year target. Here's the things that we're going to do. We use EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, as our planning guide and our business methodology. We use Lean, and really what Lean for software is Agile. And so we use Agile for our software manufacturing process. But still, when we have our quarterly meetings, we have team meetings, we over communicate this because eventually it'll really sink in. I've got a really critical person in my company, and that person takes 4 to 5 times to really get excited about something new. But once they listen to it enough, and they really start to buy in, they 110% adopt and then pull everybody else with them. And so you just also got to know your people. Like I've got one of my leaders that when I go to talk to them, they are on board pretty much immediately. I generally say it once or twice and I get pretty good buy-in from that. Whereas another one who's just as critical just takes longer to buy into ideas. And so I've got to repeat things several times and it's fine.
Is that more to do with their capacity to grasp a vision, or is it more their personality in terms of they're a little more, for want of a better word, stubborn or something like that?
No, I think it is 100% their personality. Look, if they didn't have the mental capacity to do the job, they wouldn't be here. We have another EOS phrase, GWC. Do they get their job, want their job, and have the capacity to do their job? When we talk about capacity, we're talking about mental, physical, and emotional capacity. So if they didn't have the mental, physical, or emotional capacity, they wouldn't be in the seat in the first place. The fact that they're there means they've got the capacity. But then you have to deal with this fourth factor, not the mental, not the physical and emotional. You deal with their personality, like the way that person is wired. And some people just take longer to get on board with things. I actually totally misread my own personality, and COVID really laid it bare. I thought I was very, very pro change. The reality was I'm very, very pro change. I'm very excited about change and new things when I'm the one initiating it. But when it's being initiated upon me, I am not excited. I'm the opposite of excited. I'm angry.
Why is that?
I have tried to diagnose it. It is a default reaction to change that is forced upon me. It is like within seconds.
Can I make a suggestion? And I'm speaking from my own personal experience too. I think it may have something to do, or you could explore, what does it have to do with the control aspect of it?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, I'm a high control type person. And so I have a coach. I have a couple coaches actually that work with me. And I have my EOS coach, and then I have a personality type coach. And so I've worked with them on this, like, hey, how do I open up more to this and not shut the idea down when it's not my own? Like, how do I adapt the change that's forced upon me better? That's something that you have to understand about yourself and then understand about your people, because sometimes they're really excited about change when they're the ones initiating the change, but they're really not excited about change when they're not in control of it. And I think that's something that's really important for corporate innovation committees, for startups, bootstrapping. I mean, when you're dealing with bootstrapping, you've got very limited resources. And so you've got to really maximize output for the few resources you have. Elon Musk this week really shocked a lot of the social media world when he slashed the last 2 weeks, really slashed and burned the Twitter staff by thousands and cut the engineering team down by, I don't know, 60 or 70, 80%. It was pretty massive changes. And yeah, and if you go back and watch his old interviews where he was talking about why Tesla was going to be more successful than anyone was giving them credit for, and he ended up being right. He ended up being right about Tesla. He ended up being right about SpaceX. He ended up being right about Starlink. He ended up being right about a lot of things. He said you need a small group of dedicated engineers, And so I think that's something else to remember, is that the bootstrapping mentality can force you to be really capital efficient and to have this idea of highest and best use of every person and to maximize the output of a very small dedicated group of people that are building something.
So that's one of your principles, that idea of survive so that you can thrive.
Correct. Yeah, you have to. And this is number one rule of business, really, is survive, because if you can't survive for good things to happen to you, then you're not going to experience a ton of success. And what happens all too often, both in startups that are getting off the ground and launching and with innovation projects inside or spin-off projects, a lot of big tool companies like Milwaukee and Stanley Black & Decker have their own innovation incubators where they actually will spin companies off. And all too often, they don't focus on business survival. And I'm not talking about Milwaukee or DeWalt. I'm talking in general. Companies don't focus on survival as a key. They intentionally run themselves to the edge, right? They run right up to the edge of the cliff. They say, okay, we raised enough money for us to have, we've got a burn rate and a runway. That's the phrases they use, right? We've burn rate and runway. In other words, we're going to run out of cash in 2 years. And so they spend heavily until that 2-year mark. Then their ability to spend cash falls off a cliff. And then they have to either shut down or go raise more capital. And if they're in a market like they are right now, and you're going to see this a lot in the next 12 months, a lot of startups that are simply unable to support their cash burn and are having to either way back or shut down, because instead of focusing on survivability, like how do we survive a recession, they're focused on heavy spending, growth at all costs, and raising the next round. Well, raising the next round of investment right now is extremely complicated and very difficult. And so you're seeing the consequences of not having a survival-based mindset. When COVID hit, when 9/11 hit in 9/11/01, when I was in business, I just started. When 9/11 hit, when COVID hit, when '08 and Lehman Brothers collapsed and the economy cratered, in all of those cases, we went into hardcore survivor mode.
So what did you do right away? Because I think sometimes CEOs are too slow.
Most time they're too slow.
Yeah. So it's like 6 months, 12 months too late, and you burn through a bunch of cash that you didn't need to. So what indicators are you looking at where you're saying, hold on, now we need to make changes?
Yeah, you always have to have a simple set of numbers in your business that you're following, right? My dad's number was the UPS shipping bill in his Teflon company. So he watched the shipping bill like a hawk. Easy number. You look at it every day. No big deal. And if that number started to suffer, he started really questioning what was going on. So you've got to have some early, easy indicators. In EOS, we have a weekly scorecard, and we identify easy to understand numbers that tell us how we're doing. I've got one report I log in every day and look at, one. And it tells me just about everything I need to know on one screen. And my team knows it's the report that I look at all the time. They focus on making sure it's accurate and current, and because it's the one that we're logging in and checking out and make decisions off of. And so I think that's a really important part of this. But you said that something important, most CEOs take too long to make critical decisions. That's 100% true. It's paralysis by analysis. They don't want to make the tough decision because it's difficult. When 9/11 hit, when Lehman Brothers collapsed, when COVID hit, in all of those instances, there's a few things you can do really quickly to control your cash burn. First, you close all open positions immediately. You stop hiring immediately, because your goal is to not only survive, but to hold on to your staff. right? Secondly, ideally, if you follow the rules I laid out in the book, you keep a couple of months of cash on hand at all times and you've paid your debt off. In '08, when Lehman had collapsed, we had paid our debt for our business off because we had a little bit of equipment debt for servers, and I had personal debt that I had incurred to start the business. I had paid off my credit cards. I'd paid off my cars. Before I really made any real money, I'd paid off my house because I bought a very inexpensive house for my first house. I kept it within reason and followed Dave Ramsey's debt snowball and followed his principles from Financial Peace University. And I jettisoned my personal debt. I jettisoned my corporate debt. And we rolled in because '07 was our first moderately good year. And then '08, the bottom dropped out at the end because of the Lehman collapse and the economy cratering.
And this is when you'd pivoted to construction, right?
Yeah, it was right at the same time I was already made a decision to pivot into construction. And trust me, I got
Great
super
timing.
nervous. I was like, what the hell? The construction market's going to crater a year after I put a ton of investment into SmartBid, because we started SmartBid in 2006, started selling it January of '07. And then a year and a half later, the whole damn construction market tanks. I'm like, oh my gosh. What turned out was the best timing possible because my competitors had a ton of debt. They were venture backed. They were short on their runways. You're following the story, right? And they had to lay people off and they had a hard time servicing customers. And we picked up those employees and we went out and sold those customers and we cleaned up. I mean, we exploded out of that '08, '09 period. By 2010, we were doubling every year in size for the next few years. I mean, it was really an exciting time, but it's because we were focused on survival. We didn't have debt. We had really been focusing on innovating with a small core group of people. And it was a really important time for us, but we had really focused on survivability and generating cash and being cash flow positive, not having debt to pay back. I mean, all those things really came back to help us succeed out of that instance. But I tell you, when we hit a downturn, I mean, every single time our playbook is close any open positions immediately. It doesn't require us to fire anybody. And the people end up quitting, which happens all the time in business. You have people that leave you. You close the position when they quit. Again, you're not firing people. You're not laying them off, but you are trimming your payroll down. The other thing you do immediately is you cease all discretionary spending. I mean, anything that's remotely discretionary gets cut. And that way you can say, okay, we're not going to have as much fun this year. Some of these things we had to do in previous years, we can't do because we're conserving cash. That's the playbook's remarkably simple. And then you focus on what are the 3 or 4 major activities that generate the most profit, and let's focus on those.
So let me ask you this. You use the word we quite a lot because you have partners, and you have a part in your book about choosing partners wisely. In my experience working with contractors, partnerships can be fraught, and domestic marriage is challenging. A business marriage is equally, if not more so, challenging. Tell us a little bit about that choosing the partners wisely piece.
Yeah. I say choose it as wisely as you choose a spouse because it kind of is. I mean, think about it this way. You're spending probably more time with your business partner than when they're marriage spouse because you're 50, 60 hours a week with that person and you'll be lucky to have that much awake time with your spouse. So it's really important and it's really complicated to separate and split up and it's really painful. I mean, I've seen a lot of really bad partnerships. I've been really blessed. I got just amazing. My dad, Sebastian, Diego, Armand. I mean, these guys, they're amazing co-founders and it's been really, really awesome. Now, we have a very clear hierarchy. I don't believe in co-CEOs. I believe in the EOS model of a visionary and an integrator, and then everybody works for the integrator. That's what we have. So I'm the CEO. Sebastian's the COO. There's a very clear chain of command at the end of the day. And this almost never happens. Sebastian, we've been working together for 21 years and we've known each other since I was 14. So, I mean, we've known each other a long time, but we don't have a lot of instances where we disagree, where I have to force an issue. But you've really got to make sure that you have the right personality types too. Like he and I took a visionary integrator test a few years ago and we just got lucky that we wanted very different things. I wanted to be CEO and visionary. He really wanted to be CEO and integrator. I wanted to be externally focused and vision focused. He wanted to be internally and process focused. We didn't want each other's jobs. We loved the jobs that we were in and we needed each other to function. That's a fantastic business partnership. My dad's the same way. My dad wanted to be a limited partner and advisor. He didn't want to be active in the business. He had his own company he was running at the time I started this. It was a Teflon company. He's the world's best business advisor. He's amazing. Called me twice a day. Still calls me. I talked to him twice already today. He's 84. Still advises me. And I love him as a dad, but I also love him as a business partner. Sebastian's amazing. I got blessed with just amazing people to build this with that were all in, but we also didn't covet each other's jobs. And that's really where things get dicey and where I've seen it get dicey with a lot of my friends' businesses is when there's not a clear definition of who has what role and what person has final say, like final say, and who's running vision and who's running the integrator. And I wouldn't want to do this without my team. Wouldn't be fun to have to rebuild and find that magic again because I feel like it's not common to get that magic sauce.
I totally get the visionary integrator dichotomy. And for many construction companies, the guys who start the company, if it's a single guy, it's a visionary person and they have a challenge finding an integrator.
Yeah, huge challenges.
So I want to ask you two questions. First, on the ownership stake, what is your opinion on how ownership stakes should be divided up? Because if you're going to do the visionary integrator with a final say person, and yet maybe you own the same amount of the business, there can be more challenge in that. Is it wise to have a 51-49 arrangement or something like that? Or what's your take on that?
I don't feel like I should comment on that because there's too many criteria that could weigh in on that kind of decision making, right? Like there's too many things, like who's bringing what cash to the table and who's funding it, who's putting their line on the credit, like who has their name on the credit. If you're doing credit lines or you're doing debt, you get into some really complicated, messy stuff around the cap table. I would just say that stuff doesn't matter as much if you have a very, very clear, written, documented roles, expectations, job titles, and accountability chart. If that's cleared and agreed and known by all and followed by all, it can eliminate a lot of that garbage. And if you're having to fall back on your cap table and how many shares someone owns, something went really wrong. Like, that's really tough. And I've seen people in every type of partnership dynamic where there's like 4 partners, each one's 25%, and they've agreed beforehand on who the CEO is and who this integrator is and who the other folks are. And no one covets each other's jobs. That's the big thing. Like if they covet each other's jobs, you're going to have a battle. But I've seen people with 50-50 work. I've seen people with 60-40 work. I've seen it all work and I've seen it all fail. And so I think it's much more about, do you have and the same thing, let's pivot for the entrepreneurs out there that are in large construction companies. The same thing applies for heads of innovation, chief innovation officers at construction companies. Like, do they have a clear title, a clear set of roles? Do they have clear authority and responsibility, right? They have to be paired. You can't give someone responsibility, someone for something without the authority to go affect change. And if you pair that, then stress levels come way down. Expectations are clear. You don't end up in a turf battle. But I've watched people set up an organization for failure just with how they set their accountability chart up because they didn't want to hurt somebody's feelings. And so they'll assign similar and confusing titles to 2 different people without giving one clear authority and responsibility. And guess what happens? All hell breaks loose because there's no clear idea of who's actually calling the shots at the end of the day and what the chain of command is. I mean, that's really tough. That's why I think you see it just happened this week. Salesforce, their co-CEO stepped down and out because Benioff's the visionary, man. And you bring a second chef in the kitchen and it didn't work. There wasn't clear expectations in Salesforce. Saw the same thing at BlackBerry too. They had a co-CEO model, no clear boss, no clear accountability chart. Again, huge issues. I haven't seen a co-CEO model that really worked where they were truly co-CEOs.
Hey, this is Eric. I hope you're enjoying my conversation with James. I know that I am. Before we get back there, I just want to ask you what you think is the biggest problem that you face in your construction company. In my experience, working with contractors since 2004, it's people. People don't know how to lead. They don't know how to establish clear strategies, and they don't know how to sell. Every business problem you're facing is a people problem. And that's why I've written my book, Construction Genius: Effective, Hands-on, Practical, Simple, No BS Leadership, Strategy, and Marketing Advice for Construction Companies. You can pick up a copy by going to constructiongeniusbook.com or to Amazon. You'll find all of the different copies from the soft cover to the hard cover to the Audible and the Kindle, all on Amazon. Pick yourself up a copy and enjoy this book. Now back to my conversation with James. Yeah, no, I understand. So you mentioned this idea of the entrepreneur and the innovation officer. You have a part in your book that says innovation doesn't happen in spare time. But I know construction companies, it's like, I got all these projects I'm building and I just want to get them done. And innovation is something that is super challenging because the owners don't want to pay for it. So in your experience, what is the best way to go through that process of innovation?
Well, I say that innovation doesn't occur in spare time because I've seen many, many companies, and again, because this is a construction podcast, let's keep it to construction. I've seen a lot of general and subcontractors get in front of their companies in annual speeches and say, we are innovative. We're in a digital transformation and we're going to go and innovate and transform this company. Then I'll have their second and third tier, the managers that are actually executing the vision, like right next to me, they'll say, yeah, he won't even approve an iPad purchase. And so there's no muscle behind the discussion. It's just innovation in name only. And so first off, I haven't seen people have a lot of spare time to innovate. I mean, the reality in construction companies, they're working 5 to 6 to 7 days a week. They're working 60, 70 hours a week. And it's super high pressure, low margin, high risk environment. When would they have spare time to work on that new initiative? Now, the companies I see do it really, really well. And I talk about Rick Kahn and Travis Voss in the book. My other buddy, Todd Wynn at RO Builders in Dallas. They're dedicated. That's why I say, you have to have a dedicated space, a dedicated budget, right? And dedicated staff. Because then they have a time and money and people, even if it's one person, right? All they think about is, how do I change the way that we build buildings? How do I change the way we run our business? At our company, we've got dedicated people towards reforming the way we architect software. We have dedicated people that think about what features we're building next. When we take something seriously, dedicated people get put in those seats. So that's why I say when innovation doesn't happen in your spare time.
So you're hitting a downturn. I have dedicated people. I'm looking at my overhead. These dedicated people aren't necessarily generating the money that my superintendents are generating, or my foreman or my project managers. What do I do then?
Yeah, it's really tough, because if they're not transforming the business and generating more profits, then you might have a problem with your innovation group, right? I mean, it's not going to be direct to the bottom line P&L like a project manager. You're going to put a PM on a project. The project's going to generate profit. It's going to throw cash to the bottom line directly, immediately. An innovation group might have a 2 or 3 or 4 year horizon. And when you're bootstrapping in particular, you're playing long ball. Whereas you're playing long ball. It took me 12 years to build and sell SmartBid. It's taken me 21 years to build JB Knowledge to where it's at today. You're always playing long ball, which means that you're not thinking quarterly. Public companies think quarterly. Private companies think next round, next round, next round, which can be 12 to 24 months. Private funded companies. Bootstrap companies tend to think 3 years, 10 years, 20 years. You have a much longer time horizon. At the end of the day, if you hit a major downturn and you've already cut all discretionary spending, you've ceased all job openings, right? When people leave, you don't backfill their positions. I mean, you've done everything you can do, and all you have left is your active payroll of people who are in production capacity, and you've cut all your discretionary expenses, and your expenses still exceed your income. And this is the other thing, by the way, is I believe in driving profit all the way down to zero before you start laying people off. And that's not always the case. Big companies, big corporations cut people all the time, cut good people that are critical to the business. They cut them all the time to make profit guidance. And if you're talking to a bootstrap business, they'll reduce their margin all the way down to zero before they start reducing staff, because they know the cost of hiring and training people. It's incredibly expensive to find and hire and train people. And so I'd rather take margin all the way down to zero before you start cutting people. So if they've already done it, then yes. I mean, is the person that's in the innovation committee going to have to go before the person who's running the active projects? Probably. But I would argue that in that case, you should do an emergency conversion of your innovation team into another project team and go out and manage more projects. I would say they need to be repurposed during the downturn if it's the last case scenario.
Going back to the partnership question, just real quick, how should I go about, let's say I wanted to start a construction company, how should I go about that process of finding a partner if I don't want to do it just myself?
I was fortunate that I went to high school and grew up with mine. And I think that this is a question a lot of tech companies have, because they will all too often have the business idea person, the salesperson. They have a hard time finding the technical co-founder. That's one of the chief difficulties, is finding a co-founder who's really technical in nature, who can lead the engineering efforts. And I would argue in construction, that's often the case too. You have a lot of people who want to own construction companies, but who knows how to actually build a building? Legit, who's framed a house, or who's framed a commercial space, who's hung the drywall and done sheetrock work with tape and float, paint. I mean, who's done the electrical work and the HVAC and mechanical, who's coordinated, that technical. I would argue that that's one of the hardest things. On my case, both Sebastian and I were code writers. We'd done years and years and years of computer science training, and we'd written a lot of software. So you had two technical co-founders. My dad was not a technical co-founder, right? But he had the business experience. And so I'd say networking is really critical. Again, rule number 7, get out and sell. You've got to get out and network like crazy. You got to be a really voracious professional networker in business in general. So I'd say you're going to find your partners and co-founders by getting out and networking in association groups. If you're a mechanical contractor, you're going to go to MCAA, or you're going to go to If you're electrical, you might go to Nika, or if you're a general contractor, join AGC or ABC. If you're in a tech company, you might go to a tech incubator group, or you might go to technology conferences, or you might go to Y Combinator. I mean, there's a lot of different organizations where you can get paired, you can meet people, network with folks, and find your co-founders. So I think that if you're not going to network and get out, I mean, I've seen a big hesitancy of people starting businesses or growing businesses that don't want to get out and do the hard work of meeting people, building relationships, going to conferences because they want to be home every night at 5 o'clock. Entrepreneurship probably isn't for you if that's the case, right? And when you're looking for co-founders, that's really important too. You've got to get out and network. There's a startup house in Austin where people literally all go cohabitate for a month with a bunch of other startup folks, and they form a lot of these type of relationships. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. It just depends on what kind of business you want to get into.
Yeah, it's interesting. You have a part in your book called Finding the End of the Rainbow. What do you mean by finding the end of the rainbow?
Yeah, you've got to have a clear picture of what the end looks like for you and what your end game is. Like right now, I've got a 5, 15, and 25 year window that I'm looking at right now that gets me, I'm 43, gets me to 68. I had the plan for the first 20 years. I had about a 20-year plan, and it was really exciting, a lot of fun. And now I'm on a 25-year plan because I've got 5, 15, and 20, 25-year goals, gets me to 68. So I think that you've got to really explore and look at when you're, and I got this from when you're looking at a rainbow and you look at the very end of it, it's like, well, what does that look like over there? Of course, we all know you can't actually find the end of a rainbow, but in a business, you can. You got to visualize what that pot of gold looks like or what your life looks like. And for me, too, this process has ended up looking more like, what does my life look like? And what is even retirement? Because to me, retirement is doing what you want, when you want, with who you want, where you want to do it, right? So you're controlling time, task, team, technique, not necessarily stopping working. I really don't have a desire. I've watched really good friends of mine who are 25 or 30 years my senior retire and be totally miserable because they never went through that process of saying, hey, what does the end of the rainbow look like for me? Like, really, what does that life look like? Not money-wise, because it's easy to run the math formula and say, okay, it's going to take me this amount of money every year to live. I've got to have this much money to generate cash for that to work. That's really not what I'm talking about. That's the easy part. The hard part is like, what does my everyday life look like? And the same thing when you're entering a company sale, and that the part of the book where I talked about that was when I was talking about selling the company. And there came a time with SmartBid, our construction bidding platform, when it was time to sell. It was either time to actually go out and raise money and try and compete against all the venture-funded startups. And I didn't want to do that or exit because I was at a point where those were really the two options that I had.
How did you know it was time to sell?
Well, when you start looking at the number of potential buyers in the space, that's a really important factor. Like, it's kind of like when you're at a dance and everyone's dance cards starting to fill up, back when they used to have dance cards.
Yeah, back in the day.
Yeah, back in the day. I mean, I kind of wish we'd go back to dance cards again.
Really?
When dance cards would start to fill up, you're like, well, if I don't get on a dance card, I'm going to be dancing by myself here. And there's generally a limited number of buyers for a specific type of company. I mean, selling companies is challenging. And so you got to say, well, how many have done an acquisition? How many haven't? And who's left? And what's their capital reserves look like to actually go and conduct a transaction like this? And ideally, you want to exit to a strategic rather than just a private equity or money buyer, because a strategic is going to have a really clear picture of what they want to do with the business. And they're going to be less likely to require you to stay there. Like my exit with SmartBid, I stayed with JB Knowledge. I didn't go with SmartBid. And 95% of my staff stayed with me. We had maybe 10 or 12 people that went with SmartBid to the acquirer because they were strategic. They knew what to do with the product. And so I think that's really important, that you've got to know, like, hey, there's less and less potential buyers because they're all doing transactions. And if you don't get in this tranche of transactions, you're going to be in this business for another few years at the least.
What was the gap between what you thought the company was worth and what you sold it for?
No, it was on spot.
In my experience, construction company owners who want to sell their business, they way overvalue their business in many cases. Why do you think that is?
Well, construction companies are a little different than tech companies. In software as a service businesses, you've got recurring revenue on a product that is virtual in nature. So you still have to spend a lot of money to keep it running, but you've got a true recurring asset. Like the real value in all enterprises is in recurring revenue. And so any business that's a recurring revenue business is going to be worth more than a business that is a one-off project business. And that impacts construction a lot. That's why I've recommended to every construction company owner I know to have a healthy service business, because they can sign recurring revenue service contracts to maintain buildings. And those recurring revenue service contracts, when the economy dries up, people have to maintain their buildings more because they can't afford to build new ones. And so I think one of the chief things I've seen in construction around M&A activity is that they overvalue a project organization. We did $300 million last year. Yeah, but that was all one-time money. What's your backlog look like? I mean, backlogs aren't guaranteed, Eric. They evaporate all the time.
Especially in the economy that we're in at the moment.
Especially in construction. Backlogs tend to evaporate like Kaiser Soze, man, like in the wind. And that's something you got to really be careful of. So I think, first off, people get real emotional about their businesses. They assign an abnormally high value to parting with them. In fact, I was reading a book last year that talked about that people assign more value to things that they already own than to something they don't own, even though it's the same thing. And so there's a natural human tendency to assign an abnormally high value to something you already have, rather than if you were buying that thing. They're two very different price points because you're emotionally attached to it. So I think there's that, but there's also this misunderstanding. And that's why you saw with was it Katerra?
Yeah.
So Katerra raised billions of dollars from Masayoshi-san.
Yeah.
Right?
Like the soft dudes.
Out of
What are
Japan.
they called? Yeah.
So they raised billions of dollars. They acquired a bunch of traditional mainline construction, architecture, and engineering companies, prefab facilities, smashed it all together. Whole thing blew up, went bankrupt. They sold off the pieces. Right? A lot of people benefited because they sold off these big facilities at pennies on the dollar. That was nice for them. But when you look at some of the core failings, what they were trying to do was to make the sum more expensive as an enterprise than the whole more expensive than the sum of the parts. They also tried to pitch Katerra as a technology company because they wanted SaaS valuations for a project business. Well, software as a service is a recurring revenue business. Just like the magazine business and the newspaper business and the subscription anything business, the media, Netflix, I mean, you name it. If people pay a recurring subscription, that company's worth more because you have a more predictable future cash flow stream. Construction is the most unpredictable future cash flow stream where the backlog can evaporate overnight. So I think that's really where the chief mistake is. They think past performance is a predictor of future results. And in construction, it ain't, because the economy hits you like a freight train.
Yeah, that whole piece that you went into there about developing a service business, that's why I like the HVAC businesses a lot. I mean, it's just like mouth-watering to think about how you can build this killer business with a nice, healthy service portion to it that adds that extra value to it. That's tremendous. So you mentioned this end of the rainbow. What's your end of the rainbow personally? Like, what do you want your legacy to be? So 68, you're out of the business. Let's just say it's 68. What do you want your legacy to be?
Well, I would have liked to have built things that mattered. I talk about that a lot with my team. I don't want to build stuff that doesn't matter. I felt that Smart Bid mattered. I feel that Terra matters. I feel that Smart Compliance matters. We solve real world problems that make our customers' lives better. Right.
Why is that? Why is it that you want to build things that matter as opposed to just make like a boatload of money?
Making something trivial.
Yeah.
I think it's a human desire to build stuff that matters. One thing I loved about building construction software is that I could go to any city in the United States and see a whole bunch of buildings that had bid through my software.
That's pretty cool.
And I knew I had a little part in it. I mean, we had like a third of all construction bid through our platform the year we sold it. Like, it was crazy. And so I could go to any city in North America and just see stuff that was bidding through my platform. I was like, that's really cool. I helped contribute to civilization. I think all people, men and women, all people seek meaning and seek to do things with meaning, because if it's just about money, there's really not a lot of meaning behind that, right? It feels like a trivial pursuit. And secondly, when it has meaning, it's more exciting, it's more fun. And so what does it look like for me 25 years from now? Have done things that mattered, built things that mattered, built up future leaders. Like, one of the things we really focus on, I have 270 employees. I've got a whole cadre of late 20s, early, mid 30s, late 30s managers that are really starting to kick butt. And I'm excited to build something that they can thrive and survive in. Right? Survive first and then thrive, and be excited to come to work. One thing I talk about with my team a lot is building a workplace that we can be excited to come to work to every day and work with other people. And we're not always successful at that. Sometimes we fail at that. Sometimes I fail at that. But that's something that we want to do. But if you're asking what my retirement activity is, that's a different question. I love to fly airplanes. So if it's not involving airplanes, I'm going to be a little sad. I also love to sail. So I really enjoy Bernoulli's principle, if you know what I mean, like sailing and flying planes, same principle, vertical versus horizontal wing. I love it, really enjoy it. The other thing I love doing is teaching. I did 5 years as an adjunct professor in construction science at Texas A&M, which is the largest construction program in the whole country. And I resigned that position because the governor of Texas asked me to be on the governing board of a public university in Houston called Texas Southern University. And I would love to either continue public service, serving a university in a board capacity like I'm doing now, or serve in a teaching capacity like I did for 5 years, because I think there's really very little greater meeting than training up the next generation of leaders and entrepreneurs and business people and builders. And so that to me is what the end of the rainbow looks like, is having the time and freedom to teach, pour into students, and travel and fly. It's just a lot of fun and it'd be super exciting. But the reality is that window for me is a long way away because I'm really having fun doing what we're doing now.
What do you think is the biggest misconception? You mentioned that you have a bunch of leaders that are in their 20s and 30s. What are the biggest misconception that the boomers or the late Gen Xers have about some of these young folks?
Well, first off, thank you for asking. This is a trigger for me.
That's good. Good. I love the triggers. Let's go.
I think generational stereotypes are BS. I think they're absolute garbage.
I agree with you 100%. Tell us about that.
So I think the Greek philosopher Heraclitus, I think that's how you say his name, he said that it was the avarice of youth. He was actually, and this is 3,000 years ago, was talking about how the next generation was entitled, self-centered, self-focused, lazy. I mean, all the things that you hear about people say about the next generation. Then I saw an article from the 1960s talking about the exact same thing, and they were describing boomers. All right, so the reality is that throughout all of human history, since human were humans, right? Young people behave in a very similar way because they don't have perspective yet, and they don't have enough scar tissue, and they don't have enough experience. So I detest generational stereotypes because you're lumping people in with saying by your birth year, it means about as much as a horoscope. Like the date you're born has no impact on you. It's just garbage. And the year you're born doesn't, because I've got 23-year-olds that work for me right now that are some of the most amazing human beings you've ever met. They give back, they work hard, they build awesome stuff. I've got 70-year-olds that work for me. Not kidding. 70-year-olds that work for me that give back, work hard. They're amazing. I've got 50-somethings. I've got every age spectrum. And look, like all businesses, we have to part ways with people, right? Either they're not a match for our values or we're not a match for theirs, right? One of the two. Or they find better opportunity. Whatever it is, it happens. All organizations have organizational turnover. And when we have to part ways with people, it is not because of what year they were born. It is much more about, do they meet our values? Do we meet theirs? Is there alignment here? Or we need to part ways? And I've seen the same selfless behavior, same hardworking behavior out of all generations. And I've seen the same selfish, self-centered behavior out of all generations. I just don't think it factors in. I don't buy it. But I do believe, like Heraclitus says, there is this thing of the avarice of youth. Young people need mentors and guidance and some tough love to adjust to the work environment. They've always needed that for thousands of years. They still need it now. It doesn't mean they're bad. It doesn't mean they're going to be bad forever, because eventually they're going to get married. They're going to have children. Bad things are going to happen. Life is going to wear all those edges down and polish them up like it did with us. It's inevitable. It's our job to kind of ride through that with them as much as we can. Now, there's some that they need to learn the hard way, which means they need to be separated from organization to learn. I think that's the last step.
That's great. I agree 100%. Tell us a little bit more about your book, Be Your Own VC, 10 Bootstrapping Principles to Generate Cash and Keep Control.
Yeah. Well, the book just came out a couple weeks ago, available on Amazon, paperback, hardcover, and on Kindle. Working on the audiobook right now. I'm a longtime podcaster. I have a construction podcast called The Content Crew. I handed that over to a co-host of mine. Now I just have one podcast called InsurTech Geek. But I wrote this book to be a manual on how to be capital efficient, how to generate cash, keep control of your efforts, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're an investor. Those are the three audiences of the book. And so it's the principles my dad taught me. It's the principles I learned over the last 21 years. And it's just the playbook that we operate with here. So that's really what it's about. It's grouped into 10 chapters, 10 principles. It's 50,000 words. It'll probably take you 6 hours to read. It's not a difficult read to get through, but it's all based on stories of me and my father and my business partner. We talk about the integrators a lot. We talk about the people that you need to surround yourself with, talk about different phases of our business. And really, like, there's a section in here on my general rules on selling, where we talk about like the 3 questions you should always ask when you go to talk to a prospect. Like, can I work for you? Do you know anyone else I can work for? And should I be part of any associations you're part of? Those are 3 questions you should always ask prospects. And so it's just a playbook on how to get things done. And that's really why I put it together. I want to give a big shout out to my editor too, Liz Beechenor, who she worked for me for 10 years as my marketing chief, and she has her own marketing agency now. And I asked her to come back with me and edit this. And so she helped turn the pile of words into a book with the world's best publicist, Katie Zapieri, who's really helped push this. And so that's really what this is all about, is helping people learn the same principles we did. It was supposed to be released a year ago, and through a random set of circumstances, we delayed it until this year. And I'm glad we did, because there's no more timely topic right now than being capital efficient and surviving and living within your means. It's really interesting.
That's great. And where can people get the book? You said Amazon. Is there a website for the book?
Yeah, it's on Amazon. You can just go to jamesbenham.com. Then we have a link to the Amazon pages where you can buy it there, and you can catch it there on Amazon. I'm speaking at a few events this coming year. That'll also be on jamesbenham.com. We'll have books there.
Great. So we'll put links in the show notes to that, James. Just tell us a little bit more about your business, because I know you do work with contractors. So yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we do. So I have 270 employees. The products that we do interact with contractors on is Smart Compliance. That's a certificate of insurance collection and tracking tool, largely used by general contractors to collect certificates of insurance from their subs. We collect and analyze their insurance, and we integrate with Procore so you can manage all the insurance on your subcontractors. We do have subs that use it as well to collect it from their suppliers and vendors. We also have a product called Terra, Terra. That's Terra.insure. What's called a RIMIS, a risk management information system. And large self-insured companies like general contractors and subs that self-insure, captives, a lot of constructions companies are part of captives, and self-insured groups. Like we have home builders associations that use software from us, and they use our software to manage their claims and manage their policies and manage all the incidents and risk so that they can manage their claims to completion. Especially if they're self-insured, they have to manage the claim to pay out the claims and deal with work comp claims and slip, trip, falls, that kind of stuff. So Smart Compliance is for claim subrogation, certificate of insurance collection. Terra is if you're self-insured or you're part of a captive, we help you manage all that risk data. And so that smartcompliance.co, Terra.insure are the two products, and the 270 plus person team at JB Knowledge would love to help you out.
Awesome. We'll put links in the show notes to all those places as well. And I appreciate your generosity, and good luck with the book. And thank you for coming on the show here today.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Super nice to meet you, and I'm excited to hear the show.
Right on. Thanks again for listening to Construction Genius. My conversation with James, I think, was extremely helpful. I hope you're getting some real takeaways that you can use. Feel free to check out his book on Amazon, Be Your Own VC, and look in the show notes for all of the links so that you can get in touch with him and find out about what he does. Before you bounce, I do want to give you a quick shout out for my book, Construction Genius, effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS leadership strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. And it's really interesting where I got the subtitle for the book from. Construction Genius is obviously the name of my company and the podcast and all that kind of stuff. But this idea of effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS leadership strategy and sales, I got that from one of my clients who was asked, what is it about Eric's training that you like? And he said, it's effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS. So if that's what you like, then you should definitely check out this book. Get yourself a copy for you and your leaders. I know you'll find it tremendously helpful. You can get it on Amazon or at constructiongeniusbook.com.